Hey everybody, JP here again. And this is part two of the load notes. This is sort of an update and some new info since last month's load notes video because Metallica has dumped a whole load of new pictures on their website. And by the way, if you don't have a fifth member, it's a free membership to this, they call it the museum area of the site. Some great stuff in here. And it seems like they're uploading this every week or two. So, some new stuff. So I was all set to do this video like last week, and I'm glad I didn't because they dumped some more stuff this week. So let's just get right into it. The first thing I want to talk about is the Until It Sleeps tracking notes. By the way, FOBD was the working title for Until It Sleeps, and it stands for Fell on Black Days, as in the Soundgarden song. And the reason being is that if you listen to the bridge of Until It Sleeps, it's in the same time signature as Fell on Black Days. It's 6/4. And actually, before they started calling it FOBD, they called it BHS. Here we go. BHS Jam, now retitled FOBD. BHS stood for Black Hole Sun. And you know, the Soundgarden influence, it's kind of funny because Kirk Hammett had said that when he came up with the Enter Sandman riff for the Black Album, he was actually trying to channel some Soundgarden type riffs from the Louder Than Love album. Before anybody starts saying, oh, they're ripping off Soundgarden, this is such a common thing for bands to do in the studio. I remember Anthrax had a section of a song that they called the Metallica part. I remember Dream Theater had a section of a song that they called Salisbury Steak because it reminded them of Salisbury Hill from Peter Gabriel. I mean, stuff like this has been going on forever, usually until lyrics are written, which might be the very end of the recording process. Working titles like this are used all the time. But what caught my eye on these track sheets, and if you remember from that first load notes video, if you didn't see it, please go watch it, or at least, watch part of it, see what we're talking about here. But on the input list, there was something called Rockhead Kick. And Rockhead Kick is a known sample that Bob Rock and Randy Staub in particular in his mixing has used. So I kind of figured, Lars was triggering a sample. It was tough to read all the notes, but it looked like it said DM4, DM5, which was an Alesis drum trigger sampling box. But looking at this, if you go down here to the extra 2 kick, the extra 421s, and we still don't know why they're separate. We still don't know why they weren't blended into the main ones. But here, the second one is replaced by Rockhead Kick D112. D112 is an AKG microphone. So the plot thickens. So it's not coming from a DM4 or a DM5. Then I looked over at this FOBD drum layout. So we've seen most of these in the original notes. We went over most of these diagrams, the microphone diagrams. But here's one we didn't see. That is the Rockhead kick drum. That is a 26-inch kick drum. Doesn't have the depth listed, but we know it's 26 inches wide. And it's about 2 feet in front of the main kick. And there's your AKG D112. Aimed at the inner head with this gap between it covered by a packing blanket. You see a packing blanket over this whole area for isolation, and then it's taped to the outer edge of the main kick drum. And he's got that described down here. And then the U47, which was normally, about 3 feet in front of the regular kick, is now moved to about 20 inches in front of this second kick. Stuff like this with kick drums, it's nothing new. It's not done all the time, but it is done. Joe Barresi is a big fan of making like tunnels out of the kick drum. That's something he's done in the past. There's a picture of Butch Vig doing this. He made like a 6-foot long kick drum tunnel by taking the heads off and just using the shells to basically make a 6-foot long kick drum and then miking it on the end. I've seen it done more that way where the heads are removed altogether and you're just making one huge drum, basically. Whereas this, it appears that the heads are still on because that AKG mic, if there was no head there, that would be aimed really funny because you got to think the foot pedal's back here, and those would be the mic stands going into the main kick. And this would be the inner head of the Rockhead kick. And the idea of having a microphone aimed at that would be to capture any resonance coming from it that was triggered by the main kick. Now, of course, I could be totally wrong. Maybe the inner head was taken off and this was just a big empty shell. Uh, until we get more evidence from maybe some future Metallica studio notes, or I get a drum in here and we just try it both ways and see which sounds best. I guess we'll just have to wait for either of those to happen before we really know. And if you saw my Tom video from last week that my buddy Drew and I did, we're going to try to recreate this Rockhead kick drum if we could get our hands on a 26-inch kick to do it with. I could get a couple 24s to try it with, but I really want to hold out and see if I can get my hands on a 26. And he's trying as well. He might have a friend that he could borrow it from. So either way, hopefully that'll be a video that we do in the future for you guys, because I'm really pumped to try this out. Also, this Rockhead kick drum was mentioned in the input list for Bleeding Me, and also in the Ronnie notes. So I would say it seems like they only had one of these 26-inch kick drums, so you're not going to see it used on any double bass stuff, but you know, some of the songs that have a really strong single bass downbeat, you could bet they probably tried it on. It's also possible that it wasn't used consistently throughout the entire song. It could have just been used for certain sections or brought in and out as needed. Of course, we don't really know that. We'll just have to maybe listen to those tracks a little more closely and try to see if we could hear a difference. Until It Sleeps, Bleeding Me, and Ronnie, those are the ones that we have, we at least have written notation evidence of it being used for. If you look at the track sheets from a couple of the other songs, here's the King Nothing track sheet. Man, by the way, TDK SAX 90, that is such a nostalgic thing to see. I haven't seen these tapes in probably 25 years, and I used to make copies of stuff on them every day. Even the DAT tapes are funny to see nowadays. But so if we look, we don't have the analog tape. We don't have the 24 track sheets for King Nothing, but we do have the Sony 3348 master tapes. Now, this was the first 24 of this would have been what was on the drum tracks that were then edited and then transferred to 3348 for overdubs. And if you look here, there's kick 1, kick 2, and then there's the kick 1 421 and kick 2 421. So there's no Rockhead on King Nothing. Actually, the King Nothing notes, there's a lot. If you want to go through this, I'm not going to go through all this now, but this is all tape edit notes. So there was a lot of analog tape editing, at least on this song, much like the Black Album. And I would assume a lot of load was done the same way. You know, drums to analog tape, basic tracks on that same reel, edited down until they were happy, and then overdubs happening on the Sony digital machines. So here we have the analog tape tracks for 2x4, kick 1, kick 2, kick 1, kick 2, 421s. So no Rockhead on here. And then you can kind of see the evolution of this. You know, like here's a take with no Jason or Kirk on it. Same with that one. And then we've got the master, and then they all get transferred down to this master. One cool thing I liked about the 2x4 master is that it, for the bass, you could see it's Black Spectre is mentioned. So that would be the Black Spectre NS2 that Jason used for most of the Black Album. I believe he always said that Load was a mix of a 58p bass and the Black Spectre. But based on this, it looks like the Black Spectre is what we got on 2x4. One interesting thing here, and this does not appear on the analog track sheets, but on the master digital, there's something called air snare on track 1. I have no idea what that is. I would love to know. I don't know if it was an overdub or, you know, they reamped it or something. Who knows? A lot of lots of possibilities there. I haven't seen that anywhere else yet, only here. So that's kind of cool. Another interesting thing here, you can see all these solo feeder tracks. So these would be like different takes of guitar solos. You have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and then solo comp. So those 6 takes were then comped down to 1, and presumably that's what made it on the album. Actually, on the King Nothing master, you could see for bass, the bass is labeled comp. I'll just pull that back up. Yeah, if you look at the King Nothing sheets, here we go. Bass comp. and then bass number 2, but this one has a did not use on it. And notice it doesn't say which bass was used here, like 2x4 says the Black Spectre. I kind of always thought, listening to the stems of King Nothing, and that's one of the only tracks from Load that I have stems of, I always thought it did sound like 2 different basses. I thought the intro sounded like a P bass with the flange or phaser on it. I forget what pedal that was. And then when the full band kicks in, I thought it sounded more like a Spectre. And it wouldn't surprise me if they did, use a couple of different basses and then comp them together. And that's why there is no bass mentioned here in particular. Now let's go to the Bleeding Me notes. By the way, the working title for Bleeding Me was BOS or Boss. I have no idea what that means. If anybody does, let me know. I'm sure it's been mentioned somewhere, but yeah, this sheet was like really, really tough to read in the collage of the book. So some new things to notice looking at it this way. The drum stuff, we got pretty much all the drum stuff right. Bass SVT, mic'd with an AKG D112. Interesting thing here, using a GML 8900 compressor. Really cool, unique compressor that you don't see very often. There's no real plug-in version of it. I wish there was. Massenburg does have a new compressor plug-in that I haven't messed around with yet, and they call it the new evolution of what the 8900 was. But as far as I know, there's no real plug-in version of the 8900. But that's really cool. So I am cooking up a Metallica bass video, and we might have to play with the Massenburg plugin to see if we could get something cool happening with that. Bass DI. Now this is interesting. I didn't notice this last time. Little Mountain DI is what's mentioned here. Jason has always mentioned it was an Evil Twin DI, which was a Claire Engineering big tube DI that sounds fantastic. I would really like to own one of them. I've used them before, but I never bought one. The Little Mountain DI, I did a little bit of research on this, and turns out that they were built by the chief tech of Little Mountain Studios, a man by the name of John Vertasek, who basically designed the studio. John passed away in, I believe, 2009, but he built the guitar splitter that Bob Rock used on many albums. I always thought Bob used the Terry Manning Deceiver that Dave Jordan liked so much. But no, it turns out he had his own version of it from Vertasek. And also, before John passed away, he licensed his design for his DI box to Radial Engineering. Radial is from the Vancouver area. And you can find that design in the JDV model DI boxes. I believe the V stands for Vertasek. I don't know that I've ever used that model from Radial, but I really want to check one out now and compare it. I have like the Radial passive DI, and it sounds great. But yeah, I love learning little things like that. So yeah, Little Mountain DI, pretty cool. And yeah, we mentioned that does go through a DBX 165, the over easy compressor, kind of the lesser known DBX, because everybody likes the 160s and the 162s for the hard knee, drum slapping. But the 165 is kind of the smoother, over easy one that kind of collects dust and gets forgotten about. So when we do a bass video, we're going to try some plugins of that and see how that works. What else was in here? Rockhead D112, just like I said, and looks like it has a drummer gate on it. Probably because that blanket didn't give enough isolation. Oh, this is interesting. The high overheads, that would be a pair of U87s high up above the drum set. They're going through a Neve stereo compressor. I would assume a 33609, although it doesn't say. But also, going back to the track sheets, the high overheads get their own pair of tracks, whereas the other pair of overhead tracks, I'm assuming, is all of the individual cymbal spot mics blended together, aside from the ride and the hi-hat, because they also got their own tracks too. And then there was the bus assignment list with the 550Bs on the toms. We got that, the GML EQ on the overheads, the old Clark Technic graphics on the kicks, and GML EQ on the bass bus there. Oh, this was cool. On the room bus, left and right room mic bus. And we know that they got all the room mics were blended down to just a pair of tracks, and they went through Pultec EQP 1A3s and Neve 1081s. So there was obviously something that the Neves were doing that the Pultecs couldn't, and vice versa. And then SSL comp, number 1. So one of the stereo SSL outboard compressors, that would be. So that's pretty cool. I'm really hoping maybe some future document dumps by Metallica will have some notes from that in it. Room stuff's always fun to play with. We've got DBX Boombox down here, and we can tell that that was a 120 XDS model subharmonic synth. So it wasn't the old-fashioned boombox, but they were still calling it that, the 120 XDS. I believe that was also Michael Beinhorn's favorite of the subharmonic synths. I think he's mentioned that before. So that's just on a bus, you know, if you want to send the bass into it or whatever. And then this is cool too, snare gate. We've got, looks like stereo gate or 2-channel gate with a key input, drummer DS201. So that makes me think maybe they were gating one of the room mics. They were keying it from maybe the close mic of the snare and opening the gate when the snare was hit, using some of the room mics for a little enhancement on the snare drum. That's pretty cool. But there is some more cool stuff in the Bleeding Me notes. There's some Kirk Hammett lead stuff that I thought was pretty cool. There's also better pictures of the sound we tried to get last time. Yet I'm not gonna go overboard on this. Y'all can check all this out for free if you really want, but it's just nice to have some better pictures. That's that Maestro rotary speaker. That's a great picture. You could barely make out that picture in the other one with the pair of KM84s on front of it there. Roto Vibe. Yeah, there's the Maestro again. And it looks like they actually did use a Hammond B3 and Leslie for that background sound. So they were using the VG8 guitar synth for some other organ type sounds, but it looks like they might have actually used the real thing for maybe that kind of droning background. It's pretty cool. And there are clearer notes for that sound too. Again, stuff that would have been helpful a month ago, but hey, whatever. We made best with what we had, and I was still quite proud of that. So this is pretty cool. This is Kirk's guitar solo towards the end of Bleeding Me. So he's playing this with Black Gibson Les Paul, Tube Screamer. We got the Tube Screamer settings over here. EMB remote wah. I had no idea he actually used that in the studio. I know that's what he used live on the Black Album tour, but I always figured he used vintage wahs in the studio, like vintage Vox wahs. I know he's talked about using Vox, but so that's cool. So he's using the EMB, and then that goes through the guitar splitter, through the amps, yada, yada, yada. And then it looks like all the guitars go down bus 24 to a Neve EQ, a 1081 EQ, and TT comp to tape. What could TT comp be? Of course, you know, the gear slut in me just needed to know that. So I thought about it for a few minutes and realized it was probably a Tube Tech comp, and then checked out the settings up here, and they actually do reflect a Tube Tech LCA 2A. Now it would be a 2B, but back then it was a 2A. I don't think the 2B was out yet. And that's kind of a cool, it's a 2-channel stereo compressor. Only one channel of it was used here for, because we're just going one bus 24 would be mono. Never tried that on guitar. That's a Joe Barresi favorite on drum bus. And that's the only place I've tried it. It was like a kind of a drum submix bus that you blend in with the underneath the regular drums. It sounds great for that. Never tried it for guitar, so now that's on my list to try, and I will certainly try it with these settings because it's pretty cool to know. And we've also got his Tube Screamer settings, which are kind of known, Kirk's Tube Screamer use. And we've got some rough settings for his Jose Marshall and his Mesa C++. So someday I may play around with these settings and see what we can come up with for the solo, but I'd also have to learn the solo. And we'll see about that. Here's the Neve 1081 settings for bus 24, and it looks like we're boosting a little bit of a bell at 6.8 kilohertz, about 2 dB or so there. A little less, about 1 dB of 1.5K. Maybe just a hint of, 680 there, if anything. And then a little bit of 100. That's a bell of 100 on the bottom. So that's cool. And then we've got Some EQs for the 421 on the Mesa cab, 57 on the Jose cab. We've got the Neve 1081s for all those. The Hate cabinet with a 421 and a 57. The thing is, we don't know exactly which amps were going into what cabinets. Well, the Jose makes sense. The Jose was probably had its own cab. We don't know what amp was going into the Hate cabinet. That's not very clear. It does look like all the guitar mics went into a Neve mixer, a standalone Neve mixer, like a sidecar type of thing. So here we've got some fader settings. So it does look like the Jose Marshall was probably the strongest, although a little bit of this, whatever was going through this vintage number 2 cabinet as well. So yeah, we don't know exactly how the guitars were routed to the cabs. Again, maybe future document dumps will give us that info, but it's still pretty cool stuff. So now I'd just like to go through some of these Candid studio picks and point out some things that you might find interesting. Hey, look, it's Bob Rock standing in front of the Maestro Rover rotating speaker. And that's the Rockhead kick drum in the back there. Let me zoom in on that for you. So yeah, that's the Rockhead. I wish we could see it actually mic'd up the way it was described, but we'll have to wait on that. Here's James playing his Martin acoustic. This is pretty cool. So we've got what looks to be a Neumann U87 right there, but then we've got a pair of AKG 414s in a stereo configuration, kind of an XY stereo. See how the top one is upside down, so the hapsels are right on top of each other there. This is interesting. In the 1.5-year documentary that I sort of chatted over a few weeks ago, when they was recording the acoustic for The Unforgiven, I was actually incorrect about the microphone, and somebody corrected me, which I was very, very happy about, that we had the ELA M251, and then there was a single AKG 414, but the mic in the middle, which I thought was like a KM66 or something, was actually a Calrex Soundfield stereo mic. And I'm noticing a trend that when Randy and Bob record acoustics, there's a stereo mic involved in that. And that's something I haven't played with yet. So this is really cool. And yeah, it's, again, something else to add to the list. So one of these days I'll have to get my hands on either a pair of matched mics like these, or maybe a stereo mic like the Calrec, something that style. And we could do a little acoustic guitar miking video. Here's James holding an SRV signature Strat. I thought that was pretty awesome. And over here, again, something you don't see every day. That looks to be a Univox Super Fuzz pedal, which is pretty awesome. That's I kind of associate that with Josh Homme, Queens of the Stone Age. I know he's a big fan of those pedals. But and Pete Townsend, of course, too, live at Leeds. That was his lead sound on that album. And then, you know, the usual array of guitars, a lot of Explorers in there. Oh, Guild 12 string, same model 12 string as mine, which I'm quite happy to see. And James playing a vintage Mellotron. I'm not sure what track that would be if that made it onto the album. To really listen to almost the whole album to see if I can pick up on where that got used. But still very cool to see. And oh, speaking of the Guild 12 string, here's Kirk playing it, kind of hidden there. But so it's tough to see the mics in this picture, but in this second one we've got a U87, looks like an AKG 460 alongside it, and then a pair of KM84s in an XY spread up top. It looks like they're trying to get a wider spread with that than the 414s in Hetfield's pick. But still, yeah, Randy and Bob, I would presume both of them were fans of a stereo capture on acoustic guitars. So I'd love to know if they used 2 tracks of tape for that, even for just a small overdub part. I could see if it was the main sound driving a song like, you know, The Unforgiven or something like that. But yeah, I'm curious. Maybe there was just some EQ via phase cancellation happening by combining the stereo capture with the mono mic. Who knows? Maybe we'll get some track sheets in the future that reveal that. And then a little bit more of the guys in the studio. More or less just chilling. And actually, in this picture, you can make out that the GML compressor, the 8900 compressor that I mentioned that was on Newsted's SVT signal. That's that at the very top there. And then we've got the SSL stereo compressor outboard and a couple of GML EQs, which were Randy favorites. And LA2A right there. And then DBX 165s in this rack, a pair of them. So this was probably gear they brought in on top of, you know, some gear that was already in the studio. At least that would be my guess. And more guitars. More and more and more. James with a talk box. That's kind of cool. There were some pictures of James tracking vocals in the control room, and here we go. Here, whisper and percussion, it looks like. Here we go. So now you're in the control room with a pair of Auratones set up so that James could do his vocals kind of live in the room. I thought that was pretty cool. It looks like, where did I see SM7? Yeah, here we go, SM7. Look at that with the serial number and everything. Make sure they use the same one. Again, that is the attention to detail. Again, I know I've said it before. It's just phenomenal, the level that they went through on this. But I guess after the Black Album, they knew that the next album they did was going to be very important. And it's so important that we're sitting here doing this right now. So yeah, I think that just about wraps it up. I think I'm going to do more of these updates as they release more info from these sessions. And, I apologize for not really making any noise on this video. There's just not a ton to work with. Oh, there is one thing from that Bleeding Me guitar tone that I wish I knew about. So yeah, much easier to see all the settings than it was on the versions of this we were working with last month. Here we go. There's just a little bit of EQ that was used on the JC120 microphones, the KM84 stereo microphones. It looks like they're just boosting a significant amount of 15K, a bell of 15K on each one. I might have brightened up that signal on its own when we did it, but yeah, I kind of wish I knew that they had actually done that. So maybe it's nothing mind-blowing, but might have helped us get a little closer even to the sound. But yeah, so anyhow, hey man, if you dig this, please like, comment, subscribe, all that great stuff. You know how much I love hearing from you guys. And yeah, my buddy and I are aiming to do the Rockhead kick drum as soon as we can get one of those drums. And hey, if you're in the New York, New Jersey area and you have a 26-inch kick drum and you don't mind us using it for a weekend or so, let me know, please. Really appreciate that. Oh, I came across 2 old Bob Rock interviews. They're short interviews, like a page each, from some old guitar magazines from the early 90s. If you guys are interested, I was thinking about maybe like reading through them in a video and maybe expounding on some of the points that he makes in them. So let me know if you think that would be interesting, and I could scan those up and we can get into that. All right. So yeah, until next time, man, talk to you guys soon. Take care.